I don't spend a lot of time. I think it was a conscious decision, though probably not, you know, after months of analysis. But I don't want to enter the is mental illness real or not fray. I think for the population that I was housed with for years and spent time with, the people who you know, spent decade and plus in psychiatric hospitals, who can't pronounce their diagnosis or the names of their medications. People have totally bought into I'm mentally ill, right? I believe you start where people are. It's the same like if you want to change, poor people that are close to the street. Feminism hasn't gotten there, and anti-racism often hasn't got there. Women still talk about their husbands, you know, beating them up because they love them, that kind of stuff, right? They've been kind of abandoned by advances, shall we say. So to go into that kind of environment and say there's no such thing as mental illness would just feed into the fear factor, because there's a huge fear factor of change of any sort, right? Because change for us is usually bad. So I wanted to find a way of not challenging people's perceptions about you know, I spent my life locked out, now you're telling me this doesn't exist, and to say, okay, here you are now, here you are now. You're living in really terrible circumstances. You're on a ton of medications. First, let's look at you know, what could change in your life. You know, what I try to do sometimes is I sort out things like side effects. I love doing that. I love when I'm talking to these guys. Just saying, you know, how did it feel when you first were diagnosed? Oh, it was terrible. It was a death sentence. It was the worst. They say, well, that's a heavy weight, right? That's a terrible thing to be told. You're mentally ill and your life is over. Okay, so that came as a big trauma, right? That's a big trauma. So you got that label now. That's a huge label. And what happened when you were diagnosed? Well, I lost my friends, right? So you got isolation there. That's bad, but it's not mental illness. Being isolated isn't mental illness, right? What happened to your, you know, what happened financially? Well, I couldn't work, right? So you got poor, you know. What do poor people in general, when you hear poor people talking, what do they talk about? You know, they talk about how depressing, the stress of trying to fill your belly every day, the stress of trying to pay the rent. Well, that's not mental illness either, those things, right? But we sort of figure everything that happens to us is caused by this thing called mental illness, because it's so big for us, right? We talk about addictions, that add-on factor of addictions. You know, when at first it helps a bit, and then, right, then it kind of rules you if you're not careful. And that sense of loss that we all carry, of maybe what could have been or should have been or whatever, and we're dealing with that too. That's not mental illness, right? So just to sort out stuff, and we talk about the sexual impotency, which guys are always shocked to hear about because they didn't know why they weren't performing. The inability to read isn't mental illness. It's a side of. So just like do all the basics, and leave that with people and let them think about that for a while, right? Rather than saying, you know, there's no such thing as mental illness and medications are bad. You gotta set the groundwork first, you know. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but I knew in the early days when I was told I was too angry, I knew that people were being scared off because their therapist would say to them, these people are angry, they're going to tell you to leave, to stop your meds. They're going to tell you, don't go back to hospital, these people are dangerous. So we were losing the really fearful contingent of the chronic labeled population, right? So adopting this more, this tone of, hey, you know, whatever you want to do is okay. The trick is to inform yourself. so you know what's happening. These are the kind of questions maybe you want to ask your psychiatrist, you know. Why do you think I have this thing that you say I have? What leads you to believe that? You know, what do you see in me that maybe I don't see that tells you I have this thing? Why are you saying this medication will help? What's it supposed to do? What's it going to do that's not so good for me, right? And explanation about dosages, length of time, all that kind of stuff. To try and to get people to take some power back in this powerless kind of environment where they have to deal with psychiatrists. At the same time, I was trying to get mental health workers to be open to that kind of questioning, because they're not, of course, right? If I tell my patient what the medication the side effects of medication can have, they won't take it. I mean, people were quite blunt in telling me that. And informed consent, even if it's a law, doesn't seem to, it seems to be an optional law, right? Because the movement, it was seen as a fringe thing. It's going to go, you know, look at all the harm the deinstitutionalization movement did. This is a phase, we'll wait it out. That's kind of what the psychiatric stance was. So to try and do some consciousness raising, I don't know how else to put it, within the worker communities, and at the same time lean on government, because they're the funding bodies, to enforce some of the changes that we were trying to make, like getting people seats on the boards of agencies. So you didn't have people being taken on outings, or, you know, so they could like affect the kind of programming that was given, affect the delivery of program, affect the hiring of staff. In the old days, not so old days, there was the great fear of people finding out things. You know, how much staff is paid, the kinds of benefits they get. We were told, oh, you don't want to be on the finance committee, that's too complicated. You know, you could, so no, I don't want to be on finance committee, but Joe over there, he knows, he understands that stuff, and so he could be on the finance committee. I'll go on the program committee, you know. Not to be limited, but that was part of our infantilization, was being told you can plan outings, but you can't have more responsibility or power than that. Because our guys were getting murdered. David Revel said that the first wave of those of us who were trying to empower ourselves was going to get wiped out by the reaction, and indeed it was brutal. It was brutal. But then it sort of became a norm, you know, and adopted in a very half-assed way, but nonetheless adopted, right? As is this notion that survivors should be working side by side.
What time range was that?
This is over 20 years. Yeah, over 20 years. The notion that I'm not a big fan of self-help groups that don't go anywhere, don't do anything. I think drop-ins are kind of like holding pens, and they don't do anything they're supposed to do. It's just like kind of like Casey House, a place where people wait to die, only not as nicely done up as Casey House is, which is a hospice. So to try and shake people's perceptions up, shake up our perceptions of who we are, right? And what we're capable of, because, you know, I'll go into Queen Street, I'll be talking to some of the guys in the hospital there. There's a wonderful thing called the Out of This World Cafe, and it was divested. It used to be a vocational rehab, and it took 2 years, I think, of negotiation before it was divested to be a survivor business under the Ontario Council of Alternative Businesses. And that was important not just because of the jobs that people could have, but it was important because of the message it sent, right? So instead of the staff seeing us shuffling down the corridors or screaming and throwing stuff or trying to get the hell out of there, you see people acting as independent, full citizens, doing their work, and it shook up shook up the union. It shook up, the therapists who would come and say, "Oh, I can see you for 10 minutes now," to be told, "No, I'm sorry, I'm working. I can see you after hours, but I can't see you now." This kind of thing. It sends a message to staff. It sends a message to the workers so I worked with them for, I don't know, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. And a lot of them had 10, 20-year connections with the bin as in and out patients. And they were compliant, and they were thankful, and they didn't know what to bitch about. They bitched about small stuff, the same way that people in my boarding home would bitch about toilet paper, but not how the hell did we get in this place to start with, right? So rather than scare them or affirm for them that this was a movement that was going to get them in trouble, right? Started out kind of gently exploring with them how it had felt to be on the ward, how they saw the nurses interacting with them, what they'd been able to get out of the hospital, of their hospital experience. Now, a lot of these guys were in not bad housing, because they'd been there so long. They'd actually fallen into some kind of supportive housing that was working for them. But of course, nothing else was going on in their lives. They'd reached this plateau, and we do that as survivors. We tend to plateau and think, okay, this is all I can get, right? An incident happened. Somebody started, a patient at the hospital started to be aggressive, and they called security, the same way staff would call security. Security didn't come. And the lady said to me, "Are staff more important than us? If we're being threatened, they don't respond? Why is that?" And I said, okay, let's talk about why that is, right? It gave an opening to talk about disparity, to talk about why some of us, like that particular patient, felt that he could threaten her, right? What the dynamics of powerlessness are, about learned behavior within the hospital. Nobody teaches you self-restraint. You're taught 4-point restraints. There's no plus for learning self-control. So we talked about all that. They had a big meeting with security, which was again empowering, which is to say we're equally as important as staff, and we have full expectations that if there's a problem, you will show, right? We did some like Jerry Springer role-playing. Role-playing is, I hate it, but the guys love it. So we did some Jerry Springer type thing, where talking about someone on welfare who's crazy, and people saying get a job, and that kind of stuff, and that person trying to explain their life and their, like that. So that was very cool. Just gradually bringing them around to shifting ideas about who they are and what they're capable of doing. And that kind of group bonding that's so essential to create that little community where they'll start caring about each other and less about caring about staff. It was really interesting to watch. But again, I don't go in saying there's no such thing as mental illness. You're captives of an institution. You got to stay with the language of the other people that you're with, and gradually try to bring them along to the point where they're not panicking, but they can look at new ideas. When I started out 20 years ago doing 1980, 30 years ago? Jesus, no, that can't be right. 80, 90, 90s? Okay, 25 years ago. It's not as bad as 30. I wanted to do, stuck in that boarding house with 70 crazy folks in horrible, horrible conditions. And the only thing I knew was writing, right, back then. So I thought I'd put out a little paper called The Cuckoo's Nest. And we wanted to expose, I wanted to expose some stuff. The fear level of the guys who I approached to write for this or interview for this was incredible. The hospital will come and take me back. it was FBA then, family benefits will come and cut me off. My therapist will get mad at me. Like the fear level is tremendous, right? For me, the trick became standing up in such a way that was public, that my community could see me and also see that I got away with it, right? That I wasn't stomped, that nobody came and dragged me away or electroshocked me. At Park, where I worked, a drop-in in Parkdale for people from rooming and boarding houses in the area, all from extended poverty backgrounds, you know, a couple of generations back, which is why they were in the bin in the first place. They would get to the nice psychiatric, middle-class psychiatric wards. They were, you know, turfed into the holding pens there at Queen Street. So at Park, when we started to look at, you know, I thought it was just my boarding home, but all the boarding homes in the area, and tried to get the guys to talk to reporters, Again, the fear level, astounding, astounding. But after a few articles started to appear in the Star and the Globe, right, it was like we had lineups of people ready to say, hey, how come I have to live like this, you know, which is it's gradual. You know, now you can't shut them up, which is annoying. But it's gradual, but it shows some progress. It shows. We had, you know, meetings with government and David Revel organized a lot with the Graham Committee, survivors all over the province, standing up, scared out of their minds, shaking like leaves. But none of the, you know, what do they call it? Clear point them. None of that. All the professionals had stats and flow charts and slides, and our guys would stand up and say, you know, my house was burnt down 3 times in the last 6 months, you know, why do I have to live like this? Highly emotional, real stuff, right? So because I started out in Shannon Court, that big sprawling boarding home, and because it was such a shock to my system to see that we still do that to people, more of a shock actually than growing up in the kind of family I grew up in, more of a shock than my own hospital experiences, more of a shock than the Douglas in Montreal. Shannon Court was like the ultimate shock. It was like, holy cow, we do this to people. We really let this kind of thing happen. And there was so many meds there, nothing good, like there was Largactil, chlorpromazine, everything was, there was more meds than you could, Haldol, all that kind of crap. People sleeping away their lives, just empty, really scary, and the professionals didn't give a shit because they couldn't see us. They couldn't see us as people who could possibly achieve anything other than this miserable existence, which is why they were so proud to say that they were maintaining us in the community. You know, like, it's just appalling. It's just appalling. And that took about 8 years to get that changed. That notion of, you know, and the anger of people who run agencies, because it's status, there's all these competing models in mental health, you know, people that want to be the cutting edge, people that want to swing their PhDs, and, you know, so to be told that they were actually doing harm and to be shown the reality of where they were putting people, they had to deny our basic humanity. They had to deny that we had anything else in our lives but the illness. We had to be incapable for them to justify how they were treating us, I think. So no, I don't get into mental illness because for me it's everything that surrounds being labeled. That's the issue. People here are barely surviving, and so it's pushing to find ways to immediately reduce the effects of poverty, to reduce the isolation, because I mean, they're crappy jobs. There's no doubt about it. I worked as a courier. I was like dead. I'm just amazed at what they do. But there's so much pride that goes with everything. You know, even walking, taking buses, taking the subway, going up to Bay Street and delivering packages to law firms, that kind of stuff. There's so much pride. Just getting out of your rooming house or boarding home, coming together before shift, sharing coffee, sharing laughter, talking to each other, saddling up with the courier bag, going out, being outside all day, tackling stigma with the AOA Express courier written right on their thing, being responsible, coming back. There's usually some kind of food been delivered. We have Second Harvest here, stuff like that. And people call and they pick up huge sandwiches from board meetings in businesses where they have, so that gets delivered so people can have some food when they come back. So when you have people in that kind of organized business, you also have access then to information, right? You have access to new skills like computers, literacy training. You have role models right in front of you. You have somewhere to go. You see the potential for upward mobility. You have help that's here and not here. And you can ask questions like, well, what do you do when you're depressed? Instead of being told what to do when you're depressed, so that people can maybe look around and find a way that they can handle mood swings or, and feel protected too. If they're starting to have problems, that there'll be people to advocate for them, right? So it's a way to politicize people. It's a way to alleviate some of the burden of poverty and isolation, loneliness, stigma, because with the sense of community, people get kind of cocky about being crazy, rather than allow themselves to be beat over the head with it, right?
It starts not to matter.
It starts to matter less. It'll never not matter, but it starts to matter less, yeah.
I'm going to bring it back to what I mentioned earlier about your ideas around survivor journals. What is survivor journal?
Well, when I was going around the province, like I told the guys I felt like a Jehovah's Witness. I bring you good news. This is what's happening here. Maybe you can do that too. Even when I was up at Whitby last month, the Whitby Psych, talking to that, doing the grand rounds there, I said to the guys, hey, you know what? You got a lousy cafeteria, frankly. But at Queen Street, what they're doing, they have a survivor business doing, like this. And just being able to tell them that, open possibilities. Because David Revel said, they killed our dreams. I think I mentioned last night, I think it was Glenn Dewar started to drive to meetings in Toronto. And I looked at him and said, you own a car? You drive? Like, it was just astounding to me that was possible. So we don't even know what to hope for. So to be able to tell people, like my kid's sister, she went with Pat Fowler from MoCab, a couple of the guys, they went to Northern Ireland and Scotland and England with the Working Like Crazy video, and they met with crazies there. The crazies would be crying, looking at, we could do that, that's something we could do. So the thing is, we don't hear these things. We don't have a forum where these kind of ideas can, although the internet is providing some of it, we don't have a place where new ideas and methods and discussions can take place. And I'm increasingly thinking that that's what I want to present, a kind of, in a leadership kind of, but not like inaccessible, whatever you say, but a good-looking, good reading journal that will help us, even if we can get it across Canada, which you can these days because of computers, to start giving people options. There's so many ways to, or so much need out there in the survivor movement that anybody with an idea should run with it. Doesn't matter what the idea is. If you can get people with you, run with it. I don't give it, but we don't. There's such a. It's so hard to get these ideas out. So I'm thinking. This is the way to go. because I'm kind of burnt out. So for me, to actually, I do some groups, I do some speaking, but it would be easier for me to contribute in that way, just to have that kind of journal go out. I've been a part of starting this supportive housing coalition, which turned out really, really badly, because I was new. I was one of 2 survivors, and the other guy collapsed. I didn't know what to put in place to protect against the professionals. So for a long time, we had little institutions all through, little house institutions. That's what I thought they were. I was very annoyed. Plus, the guys most in need weren't getting in. So it's like, I thought, so that was a bad thing. Patient advocate office, first case management that was started, all these kinds of things. And I go, oh, the Gerstein came out of the Mayor's Action Task Force on discharge psych patients. We were looking for a place where people wouldn't be afraid to go. You know what happens when you're in a hospital. The first thing, you lose any autonomy, any right to say no. So we thought it was a way of reaching people, the guys on the street who didn't want to go. Right? Reva Gerstein is a stunning woman. She's just an amazing lady. She handed over to myself, Joyce Brown, and who is a hostel worker, and a couple of other ladies, the hiring for all the staff, right? Plus the architecture of the building, the design of the building. We went to Montreal and looked at their crisis things, which were all connected to hospitals. We knew we didn't want that. I didn't want too many offices because I knew staff hide in offices. I wanted the good rooms to be the clients' rooms, not their rooms, right? I wanted affirmative action hiring. I wanted, anyway, I got everything I wanted. And that was so cool. And then for a while it was, oh, well, we can't find anybody to run it. We'll have to put up a higher salary and ask for more qualifications. And I freaked out and I said, no, because then you're going to get top heavy. And because, the more top heavy an agency is, the less staff are willing to share power because they feel they don't have any, right? So I wanted it as flat as possible. And the guy, Paul Quinn, who'd worked with me at Park for 7 years, didn't have hospital experience, which they were looking for. There was a lady who had hospital experience, so I suggested they look at 2 people, not 1. And because it's hard to be an emperor if there's 2 of you. I knew Paul wouldn't be an emperor, but so we hired them both. So we had the hospital skills, we had the not hospital skills, the community skills, right? And with control over the hiring, I think we had to hire 20 staff in a very short period of time. And then control over the training, right? We didn't look for, didn't really care about people's paper qualifications. What we wanted to know was, were people comfortable dealing with people that they didn't have an extensive file on? Did they have some confidence? Did they have an understanding of the survivor movement? Did they know about the basics of what advocacy means, So we'd ask these sort of open-ended questions without any judgmental weight on them to try and get answers to those kinds of questions. And the building is beautiful. It is so beautiful. We have these weird smoking laws. Paul contacted the original architect to come in because they were going to make us close the smoking room, and we'd have nobody staying there anymore, pretty much. But so Paul got it designed. It just incorporated into the design of the original building, and it's so classy. It looks beautiful. And for guys that never had anything to go in there, it's so cool. It's like what Reva said is maybe it'll help people expect more, in their lives, and it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. Nothing's perfect. I have a deep distrust of any agency. I got off the board because I know that I'm not effective if I start liking people. you know, and I really like Riva. So I was on the board for a while. When I was offered the leadership facilitation by the government, Canadian Mental Health Association, Ontario branch, said they'd carry it, but they put a huge fee. They were going to charge the government something like $60,000 just to have me there. Paul said, "Hey, fuck that. You can have the office upstairs, right?" So, no fee. I don't know counting and stuff. Paul did the budget. I'd say, "Paul, can I bring in 15 people to stay at that place for like 4 days?" And he'd check the budget and say, "Yep, you could do that." You know, and I wanted to make sure people had money in their pocket, because I've traveled with no money and it's really horrible. So we were able to do honorariums for people, so they'd have some money in their pocket. I remember there was like a hotel inn kind of place near the Gerstein, so it's kind of like little apartments, and the meeting rooms were in the basement. And I remember guys coming in like holding handfuls of grapes and say, "Look what we got," you know, just to be able to have that, right? And then sit and come together and talk, and it was very cool. But I could do that out of there, and people weren't scared to go there, you know. So it's a short-term stay. We looked at the design of the bedrooms in such a way there's no searching when you come in. We didn't hire staff who'd say you have to take your meds, and we didn't hire staff who'd say don't take your meds. We looked for people who would respect the people themselves and their wishes in that, right? We made rules that you couldn't blacklist anyone. Nobody was to be barred. And if there was a request to bar, it had to go right to the board, not be a staff decision, you know, that kind of stuff.
How many beds?
10, yeah. And we did not want to increase the level of dependence, because that's what institutionalization does, right? So the trick was, it's still hard, because a lot of us are used to going for attention because we're so starved for it. But to take direction from the people that are there, you know, someone who's manic just may need to stay up and listen to music. So what, right? It's not disturbing anyone. We have earphones and stuff. Just taking direction, not to go after people and say, "How are you today?" or "Did your bowels move?" or whatever other weird questions we used to get in hospital, but to give power back. You know, like, what worked for you the last time you were feeling this way? Not, "I think this is best for you," kind of thing, you know? And to try and help people develop skills to handle, you know, the next crisis. And we didn't want, you know, in the old days you weren't allowed to self-refer to hardly any programs. So that became a critical thing. We wanted people to be able to call directly, not through a worker. We were also afraid that the hospitals would take over in referring clients to us. So there's an answering machine that takes calls from the hospital, and everybody else gets a real person. So that became really important. The notion, we won that early on too. And the objections were, well, how can a person know if they're psychotic? Well, there's, you know, you have to translate and read back to the person what they're saying. And if you listen, you can understand that they're, you know, they're distressed and what's distressing them. It doesn't mean that they're talking gibberish just because they're out of it, right? We asked for the reasonable choice of worker within an agency or institution. That was seen as a really, really bad idea. They said, "Oh, everybody will go to the one they like." So we said, take the one you like and have him train the other staff, right? In how to, don't refuse people reasonable choice, right? We have a right to like and dislike. It's not all pathology. Okay, next question. Being in Shannon Court, having been told essentially that my life was over. That's it, kid. This is it. You'll be taken care of here. That's what they told me. You'll have your meals made for you. You know, that's it. That was the lowest, absolute lowest point of my life. What brought me out of that was because I'd worked 4 years in a group home. I'd taken care of 7 teenage boys, right? I was 23, the oldest was 18. I was a live-in mother for these guys. I'd done Dawson College. I'd been on the English department as a student party, you know, that kind of stuff. I was an activist, student activist. I had a year at university. So I knew that I had some capabilities, but I thought everything was gone because I couldn't stop going back into hospital. And they thought I was gone because I became chronic, and off you go, right? So to hear, when I stopped being so damn scared of these guys, because they looked terrible. They looked like the guys that I'd been scared of at the Douglas Hospital, the provincial Montreal hospital. And I was so scared of them because they all looked weird. They were gruff, rough.
The guys running show?
No, the guys living in it. It was mostly men. And I'm telling you, they all had 10 or 20 years in provincial psych hospitals. And I was scared out of my mind. When they were so gentle with me, when I finally showed up on the balcony, Jerry Bentley, God bless him, out of Whitby Psych, big, huge guy, big, huge, belly hanging almost to his ankles, hair filthy, matted beard, and he said to me, "Don't need to be scared, you know." And I thought, holy shit, you know. And they took care of me. Him, David Gidge, because like I didn't even have a proper lock on my door, man. I was just. They took care of me. They started to depend on me for things as I started to look around, and you know, they would come to me if there was trouble in the house. I would start to handle some kind of scary stuff, right? And I gradually I started to want to understand how this place came into being, and started to feel myself as someone who was still of value. You know, abused children always think they have no right to space, right? So it was like, if I'm not, it still is, if I'm not doing something of value, then there's no reason to live, yada, yada, yada. So when I think it took me probably 2 years to stick my nose out the door. But all during those 2 years, people would tell me about what had happened to them. I'll tell you, you can't feel sorry for yourself when you hear that kind of stuff. You know, I was crying a lot, but not for me. And I didn't understand why I was hearing all this stuff. I used to go in and go, I don't want to hear it anymore. Most terrible stories people would tell. And so I remembered some of this advocacy stuff that I'd done. The only thing I knew was paper, so we started that Cuckoo's Nest, but I did it smart. I made sure that it got to people like the Globe and Mail and the Minister's Office, the Minister of Health, and that we never put circulation numbers on it, and you know, and started making allies. In the earliest days, Ann Harris, she's dead now, she was running Archway, which was a satellite program. She is one of the ones who was persecuted for being too survivor friendly. Great lady, great lady. She got me access to typewriters. That's how old I am. Access to typewriters and a photocopier to put it out. Even after a whole tribe of nurses came up to me and said, "We think perhaps that the name Cuckoo's Nest would be offensive to our clients." I said, "I'm crazy and I have no trouble with it, you know." We even had to fight for the right to have the name on the paper, right? So that gradual rebuilding, even though I did it all wrong, and I was a stranger in the city. I didn't understand how things worked. I was on welfare for a horrendously long time. I had to walk to meetings, and I wasn't even sure where I was walking to. Anybody who didn't want me to attend just had to have it somewhere that wasn't within walking distance. It was, but gradually started putting pieces together, who does what, how things get done. David Rebel was an alderman at City Hall. We had a boarding home lunch. We did this like kind of performance piece. Dead roaches and cobwebs sprayed, and we had the mayor line up like as the tenants are forced to line up. We slop soup, all the guys at Park, we put out a French menu, so that looked really good. Saucisson de moutarde, vin dans un sac brun, stuff like this, so it sounded good. We left the bread out overnight, stale, we got that horrible meat that's punched through with macaroni. Didn't put any mustard on things, but, just started to connect and to find allies in the hospital as well, so that we were getting information and leaks when we needed them. Leaks about abuse, leaks about, for instance, somebody's finger was cut off in voc rehab. They weren't sent to the hospital, they were sent to a psych ward, that kind of stuff. So that we were able to, and we published in the centerfold every 3 months an updated list of who had died. They didn't know how we got those, and I wasn't telling, but we had, what the hospital does, so they don't show up on their books, right? They transfer, so the legal place of death isn't at Queen Street. So we'd publish the names, and the staff would look through that, because they weren't told either who died, and we did that for a long time. Then we had our cable show, Cuckoo's Nest Cable, which was fun. And we had the minister on, we had all candidates on, that kind of stuff, That was Willie Jong. He was really cool. He gave us that television slot to work with.
Did you mention so it's cable, that was...
McLean Hunter Cable was, I think they're gone now, it's all Rogers, but yeah. Which gave the guys something, because to see themselves.
Set up the lights.
Yeah, all crazy crew. It was great. Through that I met Joy Slinger. He's a columnist for the Toronto Star. His stepson is a crazy in Parkdale. I've been at 7 inquests as an expert witness on aftercare and housing, and I met Joey there. He did a lot of columns for us. Through him, I met June Callwood. No, I met June Callwood before. June Callwood was a big help to me personally in terms of getting published.
Now, segue into your publishing.
Well, when I was working at Park and totally burning out, that's why I'm so old now. Working 7 days a week, you never take a vacation. You're responsible for every death. Every death. In all of Parkdale, I was personally responsible for. I really believed that, which is really egotistical when you think about it. But I felt that. I felt it. I'm not working hard enough. I'm not going to enough meetings. I'm not. And they wanted me. Hume Cronin was a volunteer at Park, and his wife knows I'm gay. His wife has a cottage up in Muskoka, which is a really ritzy cottage area. She said that it would be okay with her if we spent a month up there in the winter just writing. So, and we did. We spent the first 2 days messing up the cottage and making it look writerly. And he wrote poetry. He writes poetry. I write. I closed my eyes every morning and remembered all those horrible stories I'd been told. I remembered the boarding home, remembered the rooms, remembered the way people talked, the way they looked. And I put down a list of 7 things or 8 things that were burned into my brain. I was so egotistical. I said to myself, all I have to do is write it. I had no idea the realities of publishing, eh? But I never doubted it would get printed. So I wrote as true, because those guys were alive. You know, they were. So they came. So at the end of the month, I had their stories all out. And June Colwood, who I'd met when this really nice lady who'd been on the Supportive Housing Coalition, Margaret Fraser, got cancer and she didn't have nobody and she didn't want to die in a hospital. So some people set up like a hospice team. We'd go in, spend at her house. She could choose who she wanted, which was pretty cool. And just, you know, did shifts. So we did that. June's got this book, 12 Weeks in Spring. 12 Weeks in Spring. We did that for 12 weeks. I didn't meet June until the funeral. And she came to interview me after for the book. I asked her if she'd look at what I'd done, and she said, I would be honored. So all of a sudden, I had an agent who's still my agent, who wasn't going to charge me her percentage, but I told her she had to. And I got a call from Penguin. They were on the highway back then. I couldn't get to them, but I had a lift up. And they said, come in. They wanted to see how crazy I was. That's what they wanted to see. Because it's not just the writing, it's you got to sell it, right? So I went, and I met with Cynthia, who's my best friend now. She's publisher there. And they weren't going to pay me up front. So I lied. I said, well, then I don't think I can write the book, you know. And they said, well, okay, you know. But they said I had to write about myself, because cleverly, of course, I hadn't done that. And they explained about seeing through the eyes of the person and all that. So we signed up, and 2 years later, 1995, it came out. And no, excuse me, 1992 or something like that. And they kept me for 5 books, which was... So I'm told that Upstairs in the Crazy House and Beyond the Crazy House are my 2 best, and I believe that, although Upstairs in the Crazy House will always be closest to me, right? And Beyond the Crazy House is kind of a look back, and how we've come, how far we've come, what we've been doing, all that kind of stuff.
Are you moving away from your interface with survivor groups, do you think?
I've never been a part of a survivor group. I very deliberately, because you know the fighting, it drives me nuts. I have no patience with, it took us 2 years to come up with a name for ourselves, for Christ's sake. That's why I say crazy. It's easier. I figured, because my role first was leadership facilitation, that I had to not be seen as partisan to any particular group. Although, of course, I have relationships everywhere. But it was to sort of stay out of the sandbox and not get involved in medication is wrong, hospitalization is wrong, but just to reach as many people as possible, and with the message that I have, and help develop. Like I worked a bit with Ontario Psychiatric Survivors Alliance. Now, Irit Shimrat and I disagree on most things, but she's a lovely person, and she's right. Nobody would listen to me if there weren't groups like hers pushing. But I get impatient. I get impatient with. I'm older, right? I'm older, and need is always. I can't stand when people jack around, and kind of forget that there's people dying on the street. You know, it just. Let's concentrate on alleviating misery. Let's talk to the guys that in a way that they can hear. Let's not scare people. So infighting I have no patience for. And I don't play well with others. It's just a part of my personality. I'm a loner, right? So I don't, like even with the Survivor Journal, I'm not going to have an editorial board. Well, that would drive me nuts. So I just want to get it out there, right? I just want to get it out there. But on the other hand, I'm a firm believer in process, just not when it involves me. I like that they're survivor groups. But even when I was doing the groups, when I went into a region, because you know, you can get to be really big ego when you're facilitating groups, and that fucks the group totally, right? So what I would do is totally reduce myself, reduce my presence, emphasize that in a region, the bonds had to be between them. You know, I didn't live there, I was going home. You guys are the guys who have to figure this shit out, you know? I'm giving you the basics of what I know. You're giving each other the basics of what you know. And then I'm going to leave. And you're responsible now, right? So it was like just getting in, getting out. Now, sometimes I take 2 from that group, 2 from that group, 2 from that group, and 2 from that group, and bring them to Toronto and get them to hear each other, because you know, it's a good mix. Sometimes guys from New Brunswick even, to bring in new ideas, new thoughts. So I mostly work with anyone except the absolute rabid anti-psychiatry. I won't work with those guys, because they don't respect me anyway, so it doesn't matter. They don't want to hear from me. We even have tapes, but they're really bad shape. Because in the OPSA, when we brought in people to teach them budgeting. Because every group fucked up on budgets, eh? I'm not surprised. I take my shoes off to count. So Paul Quinn is able to put it in such a way that even I almost begin to grasp it. I can't quite, you know, because government funding, your books have to be pretty cool. We brought in a lawyer to talk about patients' rights, and like so people from Sioux Falls, people from like Ontario's huge, eh, would be able to talk to each other, you know, in ways that were really, really cool. So utilizing funding in that way to help build. But I also, when they started to fuck up OPSA, there was, and really fuck up, like doing really stupid stuff, like smoking dope openly and that kind of shit, right? And getting into weird fights. You know, the same like Vancouver. It happened in Vancouver, that housing thing, right? At that point, I figure, let it die. I mean, let it die, and let's start with something else, right? Let's just move on, because if people are squandering opportunities, it impacts on everybody else, right? So I get very impatient when some of us tend to squander opportunities, because there's so many people who'd kill for an opportunity to get out of the mess that they're in. When I went to Vancouver, I was brought out by the guy that used to run the Greater Vancouver Mental Health something. And he said, can you see if these guys are salvageable or whatever? And I went into a meeting with them, and the guy said, so it's a housing program, government-funded housing program. These guys are fucking sitting pretty. No rent to pay hardly, you know, compared. And the guy said, we have to fight for the right to smoke dope in our rooms. And I said, Jesus Christ, you assholes. What the hell are you talking about? You have a room, do what everybody else does, smoke in the bathroom, you know. Why is this an issue? Why is this an issue? And I felt no regret when they were closed. I mean, they're the wrong people running that place. Like, just, you know, sometimes I just want to take people, bring them by the hand, put them in Parkdale and say, now you tell people, you know, why you squandered this much government funding over the right to smoke dope in your fucking room. You tell all these homeless people, you know, how much importance that was. So that's why I don't do groups. I'm hugely impatient with silliness and squandering opportunities. Yeah. Other groups have done really, really well with very little. But it's like you got to keep them honest. They got to keep remembering what they're there for, and that it's not their own particular castle. That you know what they do. We're all groundbreaking these days, man. We're all groundbreaking, and if a program fails, you know, it fails everyone in that area, everyone in that particular community. So we have to keep pushing to be the best we can and to be as inclusive as we can and to be as responsible as we can. So that's how I got to be conservative, eh? Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
my pleasure.
For, you know,
My pleasure.